Good day, good evening, everyone. I'm Zsuzsa Csergő, Director of Virtual ESN, and I'm here to welcome you at this important event at the 25th anniversary of the Dayton Accord. And I would like to, first of all, thank everyone, the panelists for being here and helping us to have this conversation, and the audience for joining us. I know this is a very busy time for everyone. And I'd like to thank Florian Bieber, who is going to moderate the discussion. He is the president of our association, president of vASN, and in his day job, he is a professor of Southeast European History and Politics, and also director of the Center for Southeast European Studies at the University of Graz. And I am going to give this virtual floor over to him so that he can introduce the panelists. Before I do that, I would also like to mention that this is really an extraordinary panel, not only because it's hosted by vASN and it's featured as our end of year important event, but also because it's a panel that is put together by people who are not only experts and analysts, but are also living and experiencing Dayton, the effects of Dayton after 25 years. So that's, I think, something extraordinary, important, and special about this panel. Florian, over to you.
Thank you very much, Zsuzsa, and thanks also for giving the opportunity to have this event at the end of this year of the vASN virtual vASN program. Thanks to the panelists. I'm very glad to have a great round of colleagues and friends joining me today to discuss 25 years since Dayton. Maybe for all of those who are watching who are already bored with discussing Dayton, and there's been a number of events in recent days and weeks, we actually will probably talk less about Dayton. And this is why, if you look at the profile, and I will introduce our panelists, we don't have people who are going to reminisce about the good old days of sitting in Ohio in 1995 or about signing in Paris a few weeks or months later. But rather, this is about trying to take or get an idea of where does Bosnia stand today and what is the legacy of Dayton. So less about Dayton as an agreement, but more as the defining document which shapes reality across Bosnia and Herzegovina since. And also what was very important for me and also for us in organizing is this, that we're having a panel with researchers also who are from Bosnia and Herzegovina, because a lot of the discussions has been often shaped by outsiders. Dayton itself was, of course, the product of outsiders in many ways, and this is in a certain way part of the challenges of talking about it. So let me introduce briefly our panel today in the order in which they will give their first comments. First of all, Daniela Majstorovic, who is a professor of English and Cultural Studies at the University of Banja Luka. She's currently affiliated with the University of Gießen as a Humboldt Experienced Research Fellow. She's had numerous stays in other institutions and across Europe, and she's looked a lot at kind of discourse analysis, critical studies, and has a kind of very reflected very critically, and we've had lots of conversations over the international presence, over Dayton and the reality of it. So she will be our first intervener and speaker. Then we'll have Damir Kapijic, who is an associate professor at the University of Sarajevo at the political science faculty, who has looked a lot at power sharing institutions, at recently in an edited collection on democratic decline and illiberal politics, also working on a project, a Horizon 2020 project on violent extremism, and also coordinated a study on which we're going to hear a little bit more about actually what does the Dayton generation think, i.e. the generation of those who were born after Dayton was signed. And then we'll have Alida Vracic, who is the founder and director of Populari, a think tank in Sarajevo. She's been conducting extensive research and developing policy advice over recent years, and specifically recently focused on the question of migration, not just from Bosnia and Herzegovina, but from the region more widely. She's also, I should mention, a member of the Balkans and Europe Policy Advisory Group, which is working, where I'm also part of, where we're working on questions of EU integration of the Western Balkans. And finally, Adnan Čerimagić, who is associated with the European Stability Initiative. He was a student in Graz before I came here, but has been working with the ESI in recent years on a think tank, a prominent think tank, which began in Bosnia and Herzegovina a bit more than 20 years ago, but has moved on to discuss larger policy questions across Europe. But Adi is the point man for Bosnia and Herzegovina, and he's also the person who has probably watched more Dayton 25 years events than anybody else in this room, and will be also telling us a little bit about that. So Daniela, let me start with you, and we're going to have a very dynamic discussion. We want to have a conversation. So, and also we invite all of the participants. You're welcome to contribute. You write your questions in the Q&A option. I will be taking them on and feeding them to our panelists throughout. So no long speeches. Daniela, when we talked about what we're going to be discussing, you were in a certain way saying, well, let's not talk about what Dayton is, but how it is experienced, and how it is, what is the meaning of Dayton for many citizens in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So how is that experience? How would you define that particular experience from what you've been looking at?
Thank you, Florian. I'd like to thank the ASN that's been greatly missed in the circle kind of my friends. We used to come to New York and present these things in person. Now it's all online. Okay, so what is a cultural studies scholar doing in political science or in discussions on Dayton and off Dayton? My question regarding Dayton, which has been going on for 20 years or 25 years, that kind of coincided with the time when I enrolled in college, has been not what Dayton is, but what Dayton does, or what is the legacy of Dayton, like you rightly pointed out, what kind of an order has Dayton created? I was really happy to see Andrew Gilbert here as one of the attendees. So I'd like to draw the attention of our audience to a phenomenal issue of Southeast European Black Sea Studies Journal that was 5 years ago that had a special issue on Dayton. And there I wrote extensively about the three phases. And I still kind of stand strongly with these three phases of Dayton, that the first phase starting in 96 and kind of continuing until 2006 is this first stage that's marked by heavy international community involvement. Institutions such as NATO, OSCE, many others, literally did everything in Bosnia, from providing peacekeeping forces to running elections, supervising local police. I was only 19 years old when working for the UN IPTF, the human dignity. So it was UN dealing with Bosnian police in terms of like bringing human dignity. I mean, we can discuss that from various sides. So yes, I'm being kind of a contemporary of Dayton as well. And I've seen these processes as a young translator back then. The second phase, this is the phase where local politicians really, we were just recovering from the war. And it was this phase that when I look at Dayton now, of course, we were all younger then, it was a phase that for a lot of Bosnian Herzegovinians was an optimistic phase that pretty much yielded to a sort of defeatism or pessimism that would ensue in 2006 when the international community's influence kind of diminished. This also coincided with privatizations of strategic enterprises in the country and the strong clash between the two main discourses, the one of absolute genocide denial and another of saying that the RS is a genocidal creation. I mean, I really use these strong determinants to kind of illustrate the kind of the conflict, the discursive, ideological rift that was present in those times, and I think pretty much still continues until this day. The third phase, which I find very interesting, and I think it's it's still going on. It's a phase that's marked by social protests. And social protests to me are the best kind of criticism of Dayton. Different social protests from Pizza in Park to Babylution to February protests of 2014 asking for revised privatizations. A lot of people in the streets in Tuzla burning cantonal government buildings. These protests didn't really happen in Republika Srpska, but what we now are witnessing today is the 1000th day of protests for justice for David. So we have all these different protests that could be from a critical discourse, analytic point of view, discussed in terms of, okay, what is it? What neuralgic spots of Dayton are they critiquing and why are they relevant? And of course, aside from social protests, there's been another trend, the one of the so-called third wave migrations. As of 2014, we're witnessing a lot of people leaving this country in this third wave. We've had the first wave during the Gastarbeiter, second during the 90s wars, and then the third wave. This is kind of this has been my preoccupation with this project in Germany called Occupy or Leave. So people literally are trying to either occupy the streets or have tried and failed and got desperate or whatever, and they're now trying to occupy these jobs in care industry, in Baustelle, construction work, and gastronomy. And this is why we're witnessing a lot of people leaving because they're like fulfilling these job roles in Germany and Austria, which also coincides with another intervening variable, and I will stop here, and that is Bosnia being part of the route. Bosnia being my hometown, Bihać, northwest of Bosnia and Herzegovina, has been this place where there are reception camps. A lot of criticism has been voiced already. And, this is kind of where we are right now. So what connects all of these things with Dayton is something that I hope to discuss later during this debate.
Great, thanks, Daniela, for these first reflections. Damir, let's continue with you. You've been organizing an opinion poll which looked at actually the attitudes of young Bosnian Herzegovinians who were born at Dayton or right afterwards. So how do they position themselves? How do they experience the Bosnia they live in, Dayton, Bosnia, as it's often called?
Thank you, Florian. Well, first, the study is one that comes as an attempt, at least, to try and look at not just general attitudes towards the Dayton peace agreement, but also what this young generation, what we call the Dayton generation, obviously. So young people who were born after the signing of the Dayton peace accords, who basically grew up their whole lives within the system, what is their attitudes towards this? And the study, it sort of gives a lot of general overviews. When we talk specifically about the Dayton peace agreement, a few things that we find is that young people see the flaws of the Dayton peace agreement pretty obviously. They see that this is an agreement and the constitution as such that is serving elites much more rather than citizens. And this is across the board, just to say. So in Republika Srpska and the Federation, on most of these issues, young people agree between the two different entities. Also between the three peoples, you see a lot of agreements on a lot of these issues. So it's not that they're politicized in one way or the other. When they say what they want from politics, it is that individual citizens that they need to have a stronger role in these political decisions. They don't see themselves as included. It's more of a sort of basic understanding of what consociationalism has brought about for the past 25 years, that every decision is made by political elites without citizens actually being involved. And of course, this leads to much lower trust and pride in institutions. So one of the answers where you could see that they were most critical was pride in the institutions of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also in the institutions of the Republika Srpska and the Federation, respectively, of where they live. So it's a huge distrust towards politics in general that have been defined by elite compromise, or non-compromise actually, but have left citizens out. And this is something where young people see that there is a need for change. So we also asked them, do you basically think that Dayton should be changed? Is it something that you feel is changeable, to put it first that way? And this is also where you can see that nobody is actually satisfied with the current constitution, but on the way that it should be changed, you don't really see too much agreement. So half of the respondents would like to see a gradual sort of change of the constitution through amendments, while another half really sees a new constitution as the only way forward. And the question that we ask then basically is, okay, what kind of change would you want to see? So what are these aspects that you think are most problematic? And here we see that young people basically think that, first of all, ethnic criteria should at least be loosened to some extent. So this is, and you could see that this is something where they agree also mostly across the board. One thing that they don't agree, for example, is changing territorial divisions within the country. Here you can see a strong pushback from ethnic, from Republika Srpska, from the entity of Republika Srpska, but also from Croats in the Federation, although there you have various ways of what territorial divisions might mean. So any sort of safeguards for ethnic groups are much more difficult to change, but actually issues such as reform of the Council of Ministers, such as regulating the judiciary and including it much more in the constitution, so much more directly. These are things that people actually agree on, that young people find that should be included in any sort of forward-thinking changes of Dayton. Now, not to sound too optimistic, because there's also sort of a thing that we asked, a few sets of questions about attitudes of young people. And while you'd see a very broad agreement that there should always be room to criticize government publicly, and that there should be no repressions to free speech, you also have a very strong sort of authoritarian mindset among people. So we asked, for example, if you would prefer a leader with a strong hand. And here actually we have over 50% of young people who fully agree that what Bosnia needs is a ruler with a strong hand, who is not bound by rules of parliament. This is sort of a basic definition of democracy. We even asked about democracy as such, and even here you could see that there is about 15% of the population who do not consider democracy an ideal form of government, and who would rather have an authoritarian or other form of government implemented. So there is always this sort of, so what you have to keep in your mind, that even though young people see the problems much clearer, so they really see what is obvious in the country, what is going wrong, they also don't really support democratic institutions per se. When we asked about whether a diverse civil society is necessary or whether opposition parties are necessary, we see a quarter of the young people actually saying that this is not something that is necessary in this country. So there is much room here, both to work with young people, but also to try and not lose them along the way and sort of lose them towards systems that might be even worse than the one that we currently have. So this is just some food for thought, and I'm really looking forward to discussing. And there's a huge set of questions that I didn't even go into. So if there's anything that you sort of consider important, just ask. We probably have it.
Great. Thanks a lot, Damir, for these first insights into the survey. I think it's certainly clear that, I think the numbers of support for authoritarianism or kind of declining support possibly for democracy is something which we see actually in other countries of the region as well in very similar numbers. But one thing where I guess maybe people agree is that they often seek a life elsewhere. This is where I would like to bring in Alida, because Alida has been working a lot on migration, on motivations, why people leave Bosnia and Herzegovina. And people have been leaving, of course, not just Bosnia, but all of the neighboring countries as well. Is migration out of Bosnia, the desire to leave Bosnia, worse than in the neighbors, or is it just very similar? Is there a specific Dayton dimension, or is it really something which is just part of the general trend we can see across Southeastern Europe today? Alida, over to you.
Thank you, Florian. Can you hear me well?
Perfectly.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for having me, and thanks for the question. I mean, to answer short, Bosnia is a special case. Bosnia is always as complicated the way we like to speak about Bosnia often, and I don't think that's necessarily always the truth, because Bosnia is a complex country, but in when it comes to immigration, at least, it's very much not specific, because this is a question that not only captures the Western Balkans, but also Southeast Europe. I just want to reflect very shortly on what Downer was saying. I think it's a paradox in itself that you know, young people have to discuss and think about the Constitution. I can't think of another place where, you know, young people are thinking about the Constitution and how to change it and what are the functions of certain ministries. But I guess that is one thing that is specific about Bosnia. As for the immigration, as you know, there has been lots of research, and it took us a couple of years to actually grasp the full dimension of it. And the reason why it took a little while is because I think every single policymaker in the region has been, you know, in this process of denial, like a conscious denial that this is even happening to begin with, because it's just a normal process. But then, of course, we have seen numbers, and numbers were quite striking. I don't think they differ that much throughout the region, because on average you lose, in every country of the region, you lose anywhere between 20,000 and 40,000 people. And when I say lose, you don't lose them really for good, because we are in the 21st century and many people go back and forth, many people study, many people work also in different places, but there are also those that are leaving for good and also with their families. And then it also took us a bit to understand, you know, why do they leave? I mean, what are the reasons? And the typical answer would be economic hardship. But we have seen that this has changed as well. This has evolved. Sorry, this has evolved as well. And people are leaving even though they have really good jobs, and even though they have very good salaries. Every now and then there is a story somewhere that you can read or hear about, where people have been working for really good and prosperous companies and simply decided not to live in such toxic atmosphere anymore. And even if it's not because of them, then it's because of their children. And once they set foot somewhere else, and when they have children and enroll them in the schools, chances that they will be actually coming back are getting lower and lower. And I think at this point, we have kind of understood why they leave, who is the sort of what are the clusters of those that are leaving, where they go to. I mean, we know what the destination countries are. We have seen that Germany is literally, you know, vacuuming everything that is possible from the region, especially when it comes to certain sectors. And I have written a little bit about it when it comes to health sector. And we have seen how that plays out also in the countries from Romania to Croatia, where you have on average, you know, hundreds of I don't know, 400, 300 doctors leaving. And it's not only about general doctors, it's about specialists. And this is why the story gets even more complicated, because you can have graduate students every year enrolling and graduating, but you cannot easily replace specialists. Now, I have also tackled this issue of migration in a somewhat different way. I mean, not only the negatives, but also some positive spin-offs of this. And for that kind of experience, I reached out to the countries that have experienced immigration. Before, in Ireland was one of the countries that I've done research on, and basically concluded that in situations such as this one, where you have you know, in Bosnia, post-war generation, but also throughout the region, you have young people that are simply not satisfied in their own countries. It's okay to have them experience, and it's okay to encourage them even to leave and see what's out there to study, and then decide whether they want to return and in what capacity they want to return. And that brings me to diaspora. Bosnia itself has a great diaspora, but if you put that together, because I'm kind of, you know, not necessarily inclined to speak about Bosnia per se, it's really the part of the region we are seen also from the outside as the region rather than specific countries. We're talking about huge diaspora that has lots of potential. And this is something that we haven't even started tapping into. There is no, I mean, we keep on talking about mapping of diaspora. We're talking about the different associations that are scattered around there. This is not really well connected. But I think that's the first step in order to understand, you know, what are the benefits, real benefits. And I'm not talking about remittances. I'm talking about real benefits, you know, networks, who knows whom. and how that can be used, but also transfer of knowledge, people returning to Bosnia and other countries in capacity of, full-time professors or just periodically to have a talk or introduce something new. So I think there's lots of potential there. But again, this is very disconnected in a way, because you don't have institutions that are speaking on equal footing about this. You don't have necessarily governments that are, with some exceptions, that they have recognized this as an issue. And recently I had, in the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks, there were really high level conferences organized even by the countries, like recipient countries like Germany, where they acknowledge this issue as a problem and want to sort of, make a step forward and see what can be done. And I think this is really good signal. But now we need the same thing. We need partners back in the region. And that I haven't seen as much. Even though there is a nominal willingness to do it, we haven't really moved as much. And I think this has to be a top-down type of intervention, because someone has to decide that we care about people, and not only people that are talented and prosperous and rich and famous, but also those that are in need of any sort, that they are willing to return, but they're also in need. And related to that, and speaking about positives and negatives, and the fact that we cannot easily replace people, because immigration is as difficult only when you cannot replace your doctor, you cannot replace your plumber. There is a big word there that everyone avoids, and it's basically migration. And we have experienced that in Bosnia, and as we speak, we're experiencing it in Bihać, in Sarajevo, and some other places, where you have literally thousands of migrants being stranded in between countries. Nobody really nobody has even begun to open up, nobody opened up this debate yet. And I think this is super important, because some of these people will eventually maybe stay in Bosnia. Their kids are enrolled in Bosnian schools. They teach language, they learn language. They will, they can become citizens of Bosnia or some other neighboring countries, and they can be also integrated into the labor market. But that requires, again, people that will sit together and decide that something has to be done about it. And there are, again, hundreds of experiences that we can look at in order to actually find good models that don't necessarily require, giving them citizenship, but integrating them into labor markets so they can also have decent lives and not be dependent on someone. So I think there are lots of different sort of angles on immigration and migration. You asked me also to compare maybe the other countries. I think that there has been a great myth about immigration will stop the moment we enter the EU. Now, of course, we're not even a candidate country, so we couldn't be further away from the EU. But we have seen on examples of Romania, Bulgaria, Croatia, that is so nearby, that this is simply not true. Unless you have conditions that will attract people from abroad, so foreigners, and keep your own people at home, this will simply not happen regardless of the EU. And Croatia has experienced huge out-migration from Croatia, and these people ended up in Germany and Ireland, interestingly. And it's interesting because one has to also follow the dynamics, what's their way of thinking, not only about return, but also about dynamics back home. And I think there was recently I've seen somewhere a survey when there were last elections in Croatia, that only like a couple of individuals literally from Ireland voted for HDZ in Croatia, which I find really interesting, because that is a big change in dynamics. So far, HDZ had a strong hold in diaspora, but diaspora is also very much changing. So there are lots of different issues that we can discuss, from migration to emigration, positives and negatives. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions that could come up.
Great, thanks a lot, Alida. And I think there are many points which we can come back to throughout our conversation today, considering especially the importance of diaspora communities, both of those who are left during the wars and never returned or maintained a foothold, and those who were left more recently. But let's go back to Adi, who has been watching discussions about Dayton religiously, and can give us a sense a little bit. there are two things I think we can talk about. One is how is Dayton and Bosnia talked about today through all of these, and also to some degrees I think this myth of exceptionalism, right? This is one of the big, I think, in my view, often one of the big challenges. When I began working on Bosnia 25 years ago, it already began, but it's always discussed as this is so different than everything else. It cannot be compared with anything. And of course, once you say that, then any insight from elsewhere becomes impossible to transfer to Bosnia and vice versa. So I guess the question is, how special and unique is Bosnia-Herzegovina in general in these conversations, or how can we productively maybe avoid this trap? Adi, the floor is yours.
Yes, thanks you very much, Florian, for inviting and for offering the floor. As you said, I think I've now tried to calculate how many conferences I've seen. I came to 8 just since 20th of November that I've watched and that I followed. Maybe to start, how I got interested in discussions on Dayton. In 2015, it was 20-year anniversary of the Dayton Peace Agreement. 20 years is kind of a big thing. So there were a lot of events, a lot of writings, etc. So I was back then still also at ESI. So what we did, I've collected basically writings, reportings on Bosnia and Herzegovina on occasion of 20 years of the Dayton. And just a couple of days ago, I was going through that material. And what was the most interesting one, it was, I think, around 400 pages of material. The only one that struck that was kind of interesting, that was a bit different from the others, was written by a newspaper in South Africa, which had a, I would say, semi-positive approach to Bosnia. The journalist came to Bosnia, observed what he has seen, and reported with a reflection, obviously also on the situation in South Africa, but reported and picked up a couple of positive things that I must say by 2015, me myself have not seen it in a positive way, and I think that is a thing that back in 2015 in particular, and of course in years that you were. That you, Florian, started working on Bosnia and on the things was I think probably even worse, is how little, obviously there is a comparison of Bosnia and Herzegovina. There was a lot of going in Bosnia and Herzegovina, talking with people who live in Bosnia and Herzegovina, sharing their perspective, and then drawing conclusion from that. Obviously, it's extremely important how people feel. It's extremely important what Damir has shared, what young people feel about Bosnia and Herzegovina, about its future. But my brain immediately asks a question: how is it different from how people in Croatia feel about the number of municipalities they have, about issues they have? That is the academic or research part of me that immediately asks the question. But when it comes to the 25th years anniversary, I would say there are three parts: how we discuss peace agreement part of the Dayton, how we discuss the constitution part of the Dayton, and how we discuss the well-being of citizens living in Bosnia and Herzegovina there. And I think that most of the people who discuss Bosnia and Herzegovina and Dayton not necessarily have these three segments in mind, and they kind of mix everything in there. So the well-being of citizens is immediately related to both whether the peace is stable or not, and whether the constitution is good or not, and the other way around. I just, for this introductory part, I prepared maybe 3 things that strike me as important to share with a wide audience of over 100 people watching us who do not necessarily watch all the conferences and have followed the things. First is, for example, the amount of times that you can hear and that you can read that Bosnia is ran by warlords or 3 ethnic parties, 3 nationalistic parties. That is today far from true. All of the leaders of political parties in Bosnia and Herzegovina today were not leaders as such during the war. Most of the political parties that are in coalitions, that are in the parliaments, have been established after the war. And there are no three parties. There is no place where three parties are running the show, to say at least. There are two small cantons where you have one party having the coalition, having the government. In all others, you need 3, 4, 5, 6 political parties to form the government. So three parties do not run, let's say, the show, and they need to take into account other interests. Now we can discuss what these interests are, but it's not, as I said, it's not about three parties or a wartime leaders. Second is Bosnia is not a country filled by interethnic hate. Whoever comes with that approach, whoever looks into Bosnia in that way, fails to see how much the peace part of the agreement has achieved since 1995. There are no tough borders or hard borders between different entities, between different cantons. A lot of people have returned, and we've looked at various peace agreements from the 1990s, and nowhere except in Bosnia and Herzegovina you can see the number of returnees, the number of property returned, the re-establishment of the parts of that social fabric and multi-ethnic fabric of Bosnia and Herzegovina. And when you talk with citizens about their daily life, you come to a conclusion that you know, when it comes at the level of the citizens, when it comes to the level of local authorities of other parts, there is no hate, there is no vengeance between citizens and populations. And most of the things that they worried about are their jobs, are issues that are not related to let's say this peace part of the agreement, but the well-being and the governance part of the agreement. And the third point is that Bosnia is not this unique constitutional architecture where nothing changes, where you can't do changes. Bosnia and Herzegovina is a federal country where changes are possible and where changes have happened. If you look at the municipal level, if you look at the cantonal level, if you look even at the state level, Bosnia today has nothing to do with the Dayton Constitution, with the Dayton 1995 Bosnia and Herzegovina. We have a lot of institutions, we have a lot of new segments, a lot of things, from, you know, tax system, military to police, to judiciary at the state level. So a lot of things have in that sense changed. And when you talk even with politicians, but also with citizens about the topics like you know, even about corruption, this latest cantonal government in Sarajevo, we've heard at one of the conferences a representative from there who was talking about concrete things that they've managed to change within the 8 months of being in the government of Canton Sarajevo. When of course, when you talk to them about, you know, is constitution good, you know, you get a lot of negative explanations. But when you talk about them, about the issues and what they as politicians or what they as citizens have seen changing, there are a lot of things that do change. So my conclusion, kind of from the debates, from reading a lot of things, is that we need a bit more realistic debate on Bosnia and Herzegovina. We need to understand what the peace implementation part of the Dayton Agreement is, what the constitutional part of the Dayton is, and how different today's Bosnia is to what was, let's say, agreed in 1995. And we need to understand what's the well-being part of the citizens, and how the change actually happens even with the system as it is today. And in order to do that, I think we need ideas on how to break the stagnation that is obviously on the well-being part happening. People feel it. A lot of data suggests that's the fact. So we need ideas on how to change that, and then we need pressure on politicians and on the institutions to deliver, to implement, to adopt, to implement, to deliver these ideas. And I think in many of the conferences that we have seen a lot of activists, a lot of people, also young politicians and politicians working in institutions who spoke about things that actually did change and that have changed. And preferably, as my last point, we would need and credible EU accession process that we don't have at the moment, that is not able to attract, to motivate, to boost changes in a more streamlined and more, let's say, towards the wealthier part of the continent that Bosnia and Herzegovina is part of. And this debate on Bosnia, on the Dayton, on the peace implementation part, on the constitutional part, and on the well-being part of it is extremely important this year in particular, because the opportunity and the interests by different international actors when it comes to Bosnia and Herzegovina has been raised in the past couple of months. So unless we have this ideas, these suggestions that are based in reality and that are based on the existing energy inside Bosnia and Herzegovina and what worked, what didn't work, what could work, we will miss the chance that we obviously have. So I'm also extremely careful when at this point when debating about this, and I think everyone should be careful, because I think actually how we debate and how we present things will have an impact on how we will debate this issue in 5 or in 10 years, maybe more than it did in 2015 when I first started to think and look into this in more detailed way. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Adi. And now I'd like to invite all of the panelists to switch on their cameras so we can all have a conversation. And I would bring you back, Daniela, to something which Adi just mentioned, and that's, well, first of all, is this a time to actually think about changing the dynamics, breaking the dynamics, which we've all, I think are well established, the problems of entrenched, not, as Adi said, 3 parties, but certainly entrenched rule by political parties who often disregard citizens' voices, or at least are not as present as they could be. You yourself have also linked social movements and migration, right? So Daniela, the question to you is also like, you mentioned, for example, Pravda za Davide, one of the movements which looks at which began around the killing of the murder of a young man in Banja Luka, and has been much more than about that, just also about dealing with corrupt police and state administration. But then again, even the body of the poor man was exhumed and reburied in Austria, in a certain way, a metaphor for migration, right? That even the dead migrate out of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So is this in a certain way those who protested, those who are dissatisfied, are they just leaving for understandable reasons, but then they're gone, and then with them the motivation for change? Or how do you see it, Daniela?
Thank you, Florian. I mean, to kind of answer your question, I guess now I literally had to write a book. So the book is called Peripheral Selves. And what I'm investigating right now, and this is a big change from like previous discourse analysis that I've done extensively, are affects in the periphery, affects of the periphery. And also I'm exploring this notion, the German word Bewegung, which refers to movement, like a social movement, but it can also be a movement out of the country. So I'm trying definitely these are very, very complex questions that you're raising. I've noticed in my research, a lot of the people who either belong to the movement. I mean, interestingly enough, the mother of the young David Dragicevic immigrated herself to Austria in 2014. So there's a very, very complex dynamics there. And then you have his father's statement, which I really try to unpack discursively, and I couldn't. I definitely needed to kind of resort to more like effective repository analytically. And this is: the state killed my son. So in this, the state killed my son, like this is a simple sentence and yet a very complex one, because in studying like what state means in this particular context, what the state meant in 2014 during the protests, this state in Bosnia and Herzegovina, this is the post-Dayton state. It's been a very elastic concept, and it's been serving different interests. Could it be an entity, one of the 2 entities? Could it be a Sarajevo canton, Tuzla canton? It's very complex and complicated. So several to kind of position it perhaps for our audience, I'd like to think somewhat structurally here. There is the issue of social movements, grassroots movements that haven't been financed by any. There's been a lot of, by the way, criticism of NGOization in Bosnia and Herzegovina, especially after 2014. A lot of these activists were actually getting paid for the activism. So there's that. And then there's this authenticity, this authenticity with social movements like movements in Tuzla and in Sarajevo and with Justice for David. These people are not getting paid to protest for 1,000 days. They're there because they truly believe. And we've had an interesting transformation from the Justice for David movement into two things, into a party, political party, movement for justice, and the Put Pravde, the path to justice, which is like an NGO. And interestingly enough, coming from Banja Luka, Alida was talking about this really untapped diasporic potential, and I completely agree with it. If you take that only like 70,000 people left Banja Luka in the 90s, it's an interesting piece of information that only some 3,000, I think 600 registered to vote this for the previous elections, and only 64 voted for Justice for David. And one would think that tapping into this potential, you would have people being critical and voting for a party that's subverting the Dayton order, that's the first left of center, I think, party in Republika Srpska, but that really didn't happen. So social movements. Then the issue, I think more talk will be about that. I think Andrew also mentioned it in the chat, and Adi Čerimagić too, this renewed interest. Again, my sixth sense tells me interventionism. What kind or what will be the shape of this renewed interest? Because if we remember when Dayton was signed, we've had 10 years of U4S4, the money pouring in media, and we have what we have. We have people literally leaving in an exodus. So my question perhaps here as a counter question to you is like what this renewed interest will bring, how is it going to look like, and how it will be in dialogue or not with this social movement as authentic responses to the Dayton crisis. I don't know if I...
Great, thanks a lot, Daniela.
But the effective aspect, definitely, I think we should, not...
Great, yeah, thanks. I would ask Damir. I have two questions. One is from David Cannon, who asked in the Q&A, and I would apologize to all of the people ask. Please go ahead and ask. I will try to select as many questions as we're going along, but I also want to make sure we have a good flow of conversation. So I will, if I'm not able to ask all the questions, the panelists might be able to pick up some in answering them on the way. But David Cannon asked, to which degree, what kind of tools do people use if they are the young generation, if they're actually convinced about that change is desirable? Is it institutional, extra-institutional? And of course, turnout numbers in Bosnia and Herzegovina have been dropping. In general, the trend is that people are not politically more active, but rather more passive. But there's been social movement, which Daniela has talked about. So there is is this the shift away from institutionalized politics to more other types? And the second question I want to ask you is, picking up on something which Adi mentioned, which is, of course, that all indicators is that, Bosnia is not a land plagued by ethnic hatred and all of those stereotypes of and so on, attitudes of hatred, and this is clearly not the case. But at the same time, the sense I often have is that the generation which is born after Dayton has maybe sometimes more nationalist and more ethnocentric attitudes because they didn't experience the pre-war Bosnia and Herzegovina and live in a more homogenous environment than their parents did. And I'm just reminded of, just to kind of contextualize for the audience, we have just a month ago the election of a mayor of Banja Luka, Stani Vukovic, who began his career to some degree with the protests, or began a boost with the protest for the Pravda za Davide, so in a certain way, from a social movement supporting a political alternative to the established political elite in Republika Srpska. But then once he got elected, he's 27 years old. He was born, and he's nearly a child of Dayton. He was born 2 years before, during the war. he said, he said he wouldn't recognize the sentencing of Radovan Karadzic and Ratko Mladic. He doesn't consider Srebrenica a genocide. He wouldn't want to have a gay pride parade in Banja Luka. So attitudes which are rather conservative for a 27-year-old who came to power on the tail end of a social protest movement. So what does it tell us about attitudes of maybe the generation which was born during the war or right afterwards?
Yes, okay. So I'll try to answer both questions as well as possible. The one by David Cannon, so what do young people actually do? And first, the myth about young people's turnout, to get that out of the way. Actually, young people, and this is also not just this opinion poll, so other opinion polls where we have self-reported voting, place young people at around between 65 and 70% voting. When you deduct from this any sort of error that you actually have when it's self-reported voting, because we don't have exit polls in Bosnia, you come about to the number, the voting turnout of the average population, which is around 55%. So this is something where young people are as politically active as their older fellow citizens. And when it comes to other forms of activism, what you do see is much less involvement in political parties. So this type of organized political activism, that's not there. And there's a much stronger preference for various forms of informal activism, be it through protests, be it through informal groups, just talking about certain politics that interest them. In the poll that we had, we also asked open-ended questions. Now, we haven't gotten around to analyzing those yet because we got the poll back less than a month ago. And these actually ask 3 questions. What is Bosnia for you today? What do you want the country to become? And what are you ready to do about it? So these 3 questions, they are open-ended. And I'm sure that there's a lot of gibberish and a lot of sort of noise in there. But once you boil it all down, we have got a lot of those answers where people actually sat down and wrote what they would be ready to do to make this country change, to make a difference. So you can be expecting something to be published in the next few months or year, hopefully, we'll see. And it does address these questions, which usually are not addressed too much in polls. The second question about, well, I'll talk about tolerance, basically. So one of these questions when we asked in the poll, we asked people if tolerance is a value of the country, of Bosnia and Herzegovina, this diversity of both religions and ethnic groups. And we had an overwhelming response. I think it was over 80% of young people who say that tolerance is absolutely something that is valuable for this country. When asked about friends from other ethnic groups, a lot of them say that they do have friends. A lot of them say that they will communicate with other people from ethnic groups. So this is, it's not sort of an entrenchment where you see ethnicity entrenched on a social level, in the social fabric of the country. On the other hand, ethnicity is heavily entrenched in the political aspect of the country. So when asked if only ethnic parties can represent your interests, of course, that's where young people say, yes, I want a party of my people to represent me, not some informal, multi-ethnic or non-ethnic or whatever party. I want my ethnic party there. They don't really specify which party, although we asked that too. But they really have a very strong preference to both being there as a citizen, as an individual, sort of the strong aspect of protecting their individual rights, but also at the same time having a strong preference for an institutionalization of collective rights. Now, how to square that circle, I think that's a crux of Dayton since its inception, where we have currently at least a much stronger focus on group rights than the individual rights. And this is something where I guess any form of discussion about the future of Dayton has to start, how to level these two.
Thanks a lot, Damir. Also for, I mean, I think some of these results really correct common perceptions, also some which I, sometimes, misconceived, and I think that's very useful to challenge it, especially when it comes to political participation, electoral participation of young people. And also this kind of tension between, you know, on one side, being tolerant and certainly not being, you know, living in an ethnic segregated environment as much as it's often perceived, but still having a preference for let's say, ethnic politics or politics, which has that dimension to it, which makes it harder to kind of find an answer to the challenges. Alida, I want to ask you about a couple of things which have come up. I mean, one thing is, of course, which comes from Daniela's observation, which is the observation is, you know, why did Pravda za Davida, the movement which is trying to change the system, not gaining votes in the diaspora, 65 you said, I think, or, you know, it doesn't matter, but like a very low number. And it's also something I've been wondering about. I mean, I have a sense, but I'm curious to hear your insight, because, you know, you have if you look at Romania, which is of course a different case, but, you know, you have a very large, very active diaspora in the West, which has been very crucial in actually pushing political parties which are challenging the status quo. In fact, they appear to have also supported the far right party in recent elections, but in the past they often supported parties which were challenging kind of clientelist parties, which might have pushed them to leave the country. So is this something, this kind of pressure from the Bosnian Herzegovinian diaspora, either the wartime diaspora who left as refugees or those who left afterwards, you know, people you know, who are living across Europe like yourself, right? Why are they not able to be politically active and challenge it? And then there's a question from Aida Ibricevic, who's asking, would a changed Bosnia change constitution? And I know we all probably agree that this is more illusionary than real, but would a different political system change the immigration, or would people still leave? And I have a sense of what you will say, but I still want to ask you this question, Alida. You have to turn on the mic. We don't hear you otherwise.
This happens all the time. I don't know why. Let me first try to maybe answer the first one. You're right. I mean, Romanian diaspora is super active, and we have seen a couple of instances what it means. I think for the Western Balkans, it's going to be a generational shift. When I mentioned Croatia earlier on, I think it's interesting because gastarbeiters and people that have left in the 90s would end up in the groups. You know, they would end up in Germany, but along, you know, with their own sort of people in some places. And you have entire cities that are basically, you know, a hub, represent a hub, and they would vote traditionally for parties such as HDZ. But then you have a generational shift. And in the past couple of years, we have seen many people going to Ireland. And for the first time, we see actually that they're choosing something different. And this is why the polling was really interesting. The survey that has been done, I think it has been published on Index, that basically showed, I think it was a one single vote, if not, you know, like one or two votes that arrived from Ireland to HDZ, which is a shocking, actually, information, knowing that obviously there is some sort of generational shift. They are angry at politicians. They are angry at corrupt you know, groups that are ruling the countries. And we have seen that HDZ, similarly like in Bosnia, we have seen with nationalist parties, suffers from exactly same disease. So I think what we, I mean, it can be easily explained, but I'm assuming that we will see this generational shift. That's the first part of it. Second part is you know, they're not being mobilized. I mean, we don't have really clear platforms for diaspora to get together, to engage and sort of try to articulate their voice. We all have our opinions, you know, wherever we live, and we're all angry at politics. We're never angry at our family and friends, and we would like to see, you know, Bosnia in a better shape. But when very few of us are organized in any sort of platform, you know, that we find very genuine and you know, that could be a possible a launching point for us to express our political opinion. And the third part of it is something that I actually got from Adi when we talked about elections and who is going to vote and who is not going to vote. Many people don't feel that they should vote unless they're there. Because why should I make, why should my vote be decisive for your life because you live there and I'm somewhere else? So I think that there are different ways to look at it, but I think we will probably see some changes, and I'm referring here for the generational change. As for the Dayton Peace Agreement and whether that would change, I mean, it's $1 million question. Who knows what would happen if? I also think that Adi is right to a great extent in telling us that we should really be realistic. It's this paradox with Bosnia that people outside of Bosnia tell Bosnians who live in Bosnia that life is actually not that bad. But then people in Bosnia tell people who left Bosnia, yes, it is, but you don't see it. I think sometimes it really takes to have, a little bit of distance to see that things are not as perfect, elsewhere, and that it takes that little to get to the point of decency. If it's a doctor, if it's a teacher, to get ourselves in a better shape. If only, not everyone is interested in their own little things. I don't know whether it would be different, but I mean, immigration is just part of it, as we know, because Bosnia is the worst country, and my colleague Tim Judah has written quite a bit about it when it comes to demography and low fertility rates. So it's not only about certain constitutional system that we have in place, but it's also governance itself. Like, how do we govern this country? Our policymakers, I don't think they really think about this at all, and I don't think they even have at hand information about how many families are in need, how many children are without one parent or both parents, what is needed to promote a sort of shared parenthood, all these things that make life habitable in one place. So coupled with this bad demography and low fertility and out immigration, you have the results as you do. I don't think it's necessarily related explicitly with the constitutional system as such, but it's the combination of factors. And I think people are all about images and perceptions. They perceive this place as not necessarily a place where they want to have their children. And that's I think until that changes, we cannot even discuss any sort of positive move forward.
Thanks, Alida. That brings me to Adi. I would like to ask you. I mean, there are two questions which I think you're very well positioned to answer. One is about is asking about the segregated educational system and to which degree this is one of the obstacles. And a few days ago at the ECFR conference on Bosnia and Herzegovina, there were the young activists who were involved in Jajce, for example, about trying to desegregate the schoolings in. There is so the question to you is to which degree this is one of the important battles. I think Maya Pastorovic is asking about that, and then Stephen Dietz is asking about the kind of professionalization of the bureaucracy or the administration, which is of course the classical literature on Europeanization, which assumes that these processes build these people who have a professional ethos and a self-interest in standards and also recognition externally, and they might put pressure on the political elites because they want to be recognized, and it's nice to be recognized by Brussels as being good administrators. And I think it's the question for you is about the things which are going on below the radar, because often the public perception is the statements of people like Milorad Dodik and others who are making these very kind of antagonistic statements, but a lot of things are of course going on below the radar, both in terms of embezzlement and corruption, but also in terms of professionalization in many ways in different directions. So I'm just kind of curious to hear what your take is on those two, and of course you're free to add to anything else you would like to comment on.
Yes, thank you very much. I read both of the questions, so I had a bit of time. Let me start by saying multi-ethnic states are complex and federal states are complex, and it's very difficult everywhere to juggle between different interests. It's also when you have a post-conflict society and when you have this multi-ethnic, and a federal state, there's also a lot of emotions, a lot of passion, and that makes it even more difficult to navigate through. I think key for Bosnia and Herzegovina is to find a process, find a way to establish what the public interest is. And for once that public interest is established, for it to be seen as legitimate by majority of citizens or by all citizens. And taking into account different interests, different viewpoints, different motivations, different things is extremely difficult in any state, in particular in multi-ethnic state and a federal state. In that sense, I don't want to portray a rosy picture of Bosnia and Herzegovina and its challenges and problems, etc. But my point was just, when we discuss about 25 years of Dayton, we need to see how these multi-ethnicity, how these different interests were juggled or were dealt with, were reconciled in 1995, in 1996, in 1997, and how that happens today. When it comes to the two schools under one roof, which is often being discussed here, and as you say, in Jajce, I think it would take me a lot of time to explain, but I will try in a very, very short way. If we move away from these two schools under one roof, we see that, you know, there's an educational system. There are different ways in dealing with the fact that in Bosnia and Herzegovina, some people feel like Bosniaks, some like Croats, some like Serbs. Others want to learn this kind of history. Others want to focus more on this kind of literature. And that because educational system is at the cantonal level, so we have 10 in Federation, 1 in Republika Srpska, there are different ways in how one deals with that. If you go to Canton Sarajevo, you will see that teachers, that's a law, teachers are allowed to speak whatever language they want. There is one curricula that they can follow, while parents can decide in a diploma end year diploma which language, for example, will be noted as that they've basically accomplished. That's one way. If in West Herzegovina, for example, a canton where majority of the population is Croat, teachers are obliged to speak in Croatian language. Again, they have only one curricula to follow, and kids who do not want to have a Croatian language in their diploma can only have it, for example, if there's 20 students, 20 pupils in one class. While in Herzegovina Neretva or in the central Bosnia canton, where these two schools under one roof exist, you have a choice where you have a separate curricula for those who want to learn Bosnian language and who want to follow the curricula that has been developed for Bosnian language, and those who want to follow in the Croat language. I think what in Jajce happened is that the students, the pupils themselves, rejected to go in different buildings, and they've demanded a change. And what was obvious is, to me, is that what was missing is obviously an offer for those parents who want to have their children, or those children who want to go to a school with both Croats, with a different kind of curricula than the one that is offered in central Bosnia. And I think we need to also approach this issue from a point of view, what has happened in the past 25 years. Where is it that majority, or where is it that part of the population wants to go? Is it the Sarajevo canton style of education and dealing with language and different style? Because if that we're going to put at the at the state level or at the federation level or throughout the country, we will get different results. We will have different results, and we need to discuss it, I think, in that way. What is kind of education that we want our children to have, in particular the parts on the quality of education, because as PISA shows, we have a terrible end results, and we need to find a way to reconcile. And we can always look to other post-conflict systems, how they dealt with it. In Northern Ireland, for example, you have a lot of an offer on integrated schools and integrated curricula. Is it that a way for us to think about educational system in Bosnia, to try to move in, because obviously things are moving. So I think we also need to, instead of just concluding certain things and just labeling certain things, we need to, I think, be more diligent in looking at what, both wider Bosnian perspective, both the historical perspective, and both what the expectations are from these or that people, and take into account what is it that the expectations, not just of parents, but also of the kids are. And in that sense, I would also like to answer to the question on public administration. I think that the big problem in Bosnian, in this third part, well-being part, is how are we developing public policies in our countries? Do we take into account different interests? Do we take into account different perspectives? And how do we get there? You know, a lot of public policies in Bosnia and Herzegovina are adopted in a cabinet among minister and deputy minister at the cantonal government session, where, you know, no one from other ministries looks at it more diligently, where there is no political debate on it. You know, I think with Alida discussions on how healthcare policies are adopted. You know, they don't take into account number of doctors, number of nurses, who is being educated, what are the illnesses that are prevailing, what are the needs, how much money there is for it. But it's just simply very often and most often decided in a small cabinet, taking into account particular smaller interests. In that sense, bureaucracy is not obviously doing its job at the level of the EU standards, because it's not providing inputs. It's not, I would say, even pressuring to do a more fact-based policies, ideas to the political decision makers. And for that to change, you need citizens, you need different interest groups to put pressure on bureaucracy and on politics. But you also would find it useful if you would have a proper, credible EU accession process that would offer Bosnia things to do, not just things to think about, and things to abstract things to discuss. I'm sorry for taking a bit.
Yeah, thanks. What I'm kind of, a couple of things which have come up in some of the questions and also your comments is, and maybe I would like to make this a last round, and you can always feel free to kind of add anything you might want to add, is the one thing is the role of international actors. I mean, if we would have had this panel 10 years ago, a lot of it would have focused on the Office of the High Representative. Cynthia Simmons asked about that. And I know, Daniela, you began, your early academic work was focusing on the discourses around the OHR. And today it seems like a non-entity, but it's still politically talked about or controversial. Is there still, Adi talked about the role of the European Union or the absence thereof. So the question is really, are the international actors really just absent units, a void at the moment, or are they still a useful function? And especially I noticed in the discussion about Dayton now, that some again says, well, we need a more proactive international engagement in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And we kind of, I feel sometimes reminded of debates which we've had 10, 15 years ago of interventionists versus those who are talking about, you know, whatever, all the nice terms, local ownership and so on. But I'm just wondering, what is the state of that? And then the other point, which has also come up in some of the questions about, Tim Waters asked about this, the question of tolerance and how, if it's different. And it's kind of, I think, a question to all of you is, it comes from Damir's survey, is that, you know, there's a people live together, and you know, national belonging is not that important in everyday life, arguably, probably for most people. It matters when they make political decisions. But it also is, of course, that with the end of the ICTY, and there's no mechanism of actually dealing with the past in any meaningful way. And if you look at the public record, the public discourse in the country, it's still very much the same narratives of the 1990s, of victimhood and responsibility and innocence of the own nation, and the other nation is responsible. And it seems even maybe worse than it was 10 years ago. So the question is really to all of you is the coexistence today at the everyday level seems to be based on silence in many ways. I'm not talking about those topics. And is this a good way, or is this actually something which is potentially destructive, where, you know, we have to talk about, or not we, or, you know, citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina have to talk about the past, but is there no space for it? Or how could that conversation happen in a meaningful way in Bosnia about what happened in the 90s? In a way which is not destructive, but at the same time helps maybe to deal with some of the, you know, the skeletons which keep coming out in political debates and tend to be often very, very polarizing. These are just some questions which maybe we can have a final round for all of you to reflect on those. And if you want to bring in anything else, you're of course welcome to do so.
If I may just briefly interrupt, from what I've heard so far from the panelists, I think that one thing that's kind of missing to me 25 years after Dayton that wasn't missing 20 years after Dayton, and this is the issue of economics. And Andrew Gilbert just asked this question, and I think it's really kind of bizarre. We didn't really even touch upon the economics. If I may just briefly quote Edin Hajdarpašić, who wrote in 2015, if someone was to say that after General Framework Agreement for Peace, that Bosnian elites, I mean, I'm not quoting, I'm paraphrasing him right now, will, for instance, expropriate the country's key economic resources with impunity, to take out staggering loans for unrealized projects, to block any attempts to change the situation. And as Steph Janssen wrote, that these elites who've been made possible through the international community, through the Dayton, and of course through the voting system, I think we're all culprits in this, that they have been threatening, with vital interests, and then within their own fiefdoms, they were the ones, allocating public sector jobs. They were the one doing partocratic clientelism and all of those things. I mean, the question now is how, with this renewed interest, I think with Biden's victory, there's going to be a renewed interest, and we can still tell there are many talks about these new deals on Dayton, et cetera. I mean, this is visible from the public sphere. So I don't really think that what we need to change is public interest or public sphere. I'm just somehow, I guess, a little bit more disillusioned with the change of discourse alone will change the reality. I would have to put my Marxist hat a little bit here and say, okay, what's with the base? How will the international community punish or not, or support or not? What's going to happen within, when we're talking about resources? The February 2014 protests pointed out that Justice for David protests weren't so much about the economics, although they raised some important political issues, even from the 90s wars. The issue of the red van, it was at the Justice for David's comments on Facebook that these issues reappeared. So Bosnia definitely is a complex country, and we need to look at the base as well as the superstructure in this case to see what these changes and turbulences will bring. Just by changing the discourse alone, I don't think we could really expect much other than people leaving the country for good in an active exodus, looking for opportunities elsewhere.
Thanks, Daniela. Damir.
The Q&A window slipped over my mute button. So yeah, 3 points here. So one is related to economy. And again, just to go back to the survey that we did, we asked people what are some of the main issues in Bosnia, and economic issues just always were up front. I mean, if we asked them if the territorial structure should respect ethnic sort of divisions or economic aspects, it was economic aspects which were more important. Of course, there's a discrepancy, but even Republika Srpska, you have over 50% of people agreeing with an economic aspect being much more relevant than an ethnic aspect in terms of territorial divisions, which are sort of one of the basic stumbling blocks of any Dayton reform. Issues that you go abroad to find better jobs, that you need right contacts, that there is difficulty in getting employment across ethnic or cantonal boundaries. All of these things are recognized as being very important. And yet we still don't have any sort of solutions that deal with this. All of the solutions or any discussion about Dayton starts first with ethnic politics, and then only somewhere down the line moves into economics. Another issue that is related to this, and young people are hugely aware of the environment. And when I say environment and the polluted environment, we can basically also talk about the physical environment. Today or tonight, Sarajevo is the 4th most polluted city in the world, and I can't open my window, for example. The second thing is the polluted political environment, because you don't have any breath of fresh air in the whole political environment as such for the past I don't know how many years. So, and young people are aware of this, that the narratives which are in the public sphere, which are politicized in a sense, they're not their narratives. They're sort of disconnected from them. And this brings me to the third point, which is possibly a way to look forward. And I mean, you do have this basic notion of tolerance. And it's not something that's new. It's not something that fades away. It's something that is obviously present for the people that they feel, that young people feel is a defining characteristic, at least in a very basic sense of tolerance, of being able to tolerate another human being and listen to him talk. And this is, I think, something that is very much missing in Bosnia, and that any sort of idea of moving forward should take into account that not just listening to decision makers, but actually listening to other citizens among themselves. So not just talking on a high level, but including and engaging citizens, be it through deliberative forums, be it through Washington style, or I think it was Washington or Oregon style sort of citizens assemblies. These are various forms that you can engage citizenry in trying to at least discuss decisions among themselves. They don't have to be implemented, but people don't talk among themselves. And that's a basic sort of thing that you really need in order to move forward. And this is something where you have the ability to actually make a change, to let people first discuss issues among themselves. So most of the young people, they have never met someone from another ethnic group on a very deep level. It was very superficial, and they have never discussed sort of very traumatic issues that they might have experienced as somebody from a certain either minority or ethnic group with other people. And this is something that's badly needed in this country, and it has always been ignored.
Thanks, Damir. That is also, I think, very, very concrete ideas of how to move the conversation forward, and maybe not talk about rehashing long established conversations, but rather discussing exactly those maybe more creative ways of engagement. Alida, what is your final take, observations? And you have to undo the mute button.
I will do so. Oh my God, lots has been said, and I don't know, like they're all very important questions for discussion. Let me just see what I have written to myself as a note. Yes, the first question was about partnerships, or actually it was about intervention, sorry. But then I was thinking about partnerships, because I still remember when I was launching my think tank in 2007, there was a situation in Bosnia where you had an strong international community. You also had really clever, actually, and sort of, well thought through policymakers in certain positions. There was a directorate for the European integration. So there was a sense that we're actually doing something on this EU accession process. And there were also people at different ministries that could, help sort of do all the digging and try to move things forward. And I've seen this myself, so I know it's possible. And that was many, many years ago, obviously. And if I'm looking back, I'm actually happy to say that that particular period was probably the period where Bosnia could have even received the candidacy status. But now, to understand what has happened in between, you have to see that first of all, at that time, international community was acting as a partner. It wasn't about imposing necessarily. It was about, what do you need? What kind of assistance do you need? Where do we need to push, and what? And let's do it, in a collaborative way. It was about people who understood, or even if they didn't understand, they didn't pretend to understand. So they were really stripping down everything and trying to understand what goes where. It was the time when Croatia was getting also closer to its own membership. So there was this willingness among neighbors to share collectively. And it's unbelievable to me, that we have lost so much from that momentum on. I mean, director for the European integration doesn't really play much of a role as we speak. EU integration is not part of any agenda whatsoever, not even among political parties. International community is, as we know, sitting there undecided whether it's going to be a partner or it's not going to be a partner, and it just acknowledges things. So I think it's just crazy that we have lost so much time, and we actually did have that momentum. And probably this is not even the only momentum. We did have those. So if we're talking about return of international community one way or the other, I would be super careful with it, because the point of you know, sort of fading away was to transfer this power to the locals. Locals did seize this power in all wrong ways. But I think we could still benefit very much from a very concrete and precise type of help, a type of assistance. And Adi touched upon some of these things. I mean, we have no idea how many beds we need in hospitals in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We don't know many things, you know, when it comes to any of the sectors that we have discussed, including the economics, privatization, or the legacy of privatization. These things could be entry points for a very concrete and very, you know, acupuncture precise type of assistance that we might want from the international community. There's Eurostat. There's so many agencies that could be super beneficial in this respect, even for the immigration issues, that we simply would need to convert into our partners rather than technical part of the process that we're actually not even actively part of. So that's one part of the thing. Second thing is, I want to reflect on what Adi said about two schools under one roof. I mean, I'm not going to get into that. Adi already explained it, that it's a complex issue, but it's also about choices that are being offered to Bosnians. I mean, there is a school that I always come up with as an example, Catholic School Center in Sarajevo, which is run by basically the church. And it has a really complex curriculum, which is very competitive if you want to study abroad, if you want to do something with your schooling further on. And it's so competitive that you have a waiting list of students, regardless of their nationality, that are, you know, interested in attending this school. So I think once you have an offer that is somewhat different, you know, that comes out of this sort of nationalist box, then people start seeing, you know, their preferences and maybe decide differently as well. And on the last point, the legacies, and then after ICT-wide, there are very little mechanisms being left. I often think about it because, you know, this period of conflict is not something that I think about, you know, day to day. It's not part of my actual life. But when I think about it, it's always a very emotional issue. And I think we kind of, you know, to easily sort of slip through this period, trying to, you know, move forward. And we have been told to move forward. And now that strikes back every now and then, because young people are opening up these discussions. And many of them are opening up these discussions in a very good way and smart way. But we equally don't discuss this properly, as much as we don't discuss the fact that Bosnians are also suffering from PTSD. It's, you know, it's something everyone knows, but it's rarely being part of any discussion, not to speak even about, you know, healing it one way or the other. And I don't know what the mechanisms could be apart from those that we have already mentioned, you know, people meeting one another. There's a story when I have set up my think tank in 2007. There was an interesting story because I had to hire some people, some researchers, and I made an advertisement. Then people actually came for an interview, and I hired them. And there was a girl from Bihać, and there was a guy who spent his entire war period or wartime in Dobrina, and I was myself in Sarajevo during the siege, you know, in the center of Sarajevo. And when we started talking, when we met, we started talking about different, and there was a girl from Mostar too. So in the next 3 years, we have really attempted and tried to understand our own interpretations of what has happened. Because for the girl in Bihać, that was a completely different, you know, version of war. For the girl in Mostar, it was about Croats and Bosniaks and not about Serbs. For the guy who lived in Dobrina, it was about tanks facing his home. And for me, it was about imaginary things, you know, imaginary or not imaginary, actually real, but I haven't seen them, you know, snipers and tanks around Sarajevo that were, you know, shooting at us. And it's interesting, we haven't been, you know, on different sides. It wasn't about nationality. We just had very different interpretations of what has happened. And it was an eye-opening for me, the experience, but this is why I think it really it requires lots of time, and it requires an actual effort to put people together to start discussing it and to see where these interpretations are different and how they, you know, how they can sort of yeah, I mean, just to discuss them really. So yeah, that's for me.
Thanks a lot, Alida. Adi, you have
Yes.
the last word, though a very short one, as we're running out of time. So sorry about that, but
Yes.
a few sentences maybe.
As we think about 25 years since Dayton, international interest in Bosnia and Herzegovina is increased. That interest is led by wish to support Bosnia and Herzegovina. No one is winning elections on whether Bosnia and Herzegovina will be more successful or less successful in 2 or 4 years. There are obviously those who do not want to see Bosnia succeed, but most of those who want to support. And I think we need to be very, very careful, in particular now when we're debating about what the issues are, where the support is needed, and how that support can be provided. And we should not take it for granted. I would like us to think and discuss how we can, you know, get the digitalization, how we transform the farming in Bosnia, how do we boost tourism, how do we get more jobs and more openness and more democratic and the more democracy and better transparency inside the institution. So my call for everyone, since this is the only conference that I've taken part in 25 years of Dayton, is for us all to be more careful and more detailed in discussing what the issues are and in presenting possible ways that outsiders can help and how the energy inside Bosnia and Herzegovina can be best used. Thanks.
Great, thanks a lot, Adi. I'd like to really thank all of you, Daniela, Alida, Damir, Adi, for your thoughts and reflections. I think the audience for being here and asking great questions. And as I promised, we didn't discuss that much about Dayton itself. This was what I was trying to do, to talk a lot about Bosnia and the reality today rather than about the past. And hopefully in 5 years' time, we can continue our conversation. I mean, not, of course, we'll all continue our conversation before then, but we can have another anniversary where maybe we can look back and reflect about the positive things which have happened in between. So thanks to all of you. This is also, in conclusion, this is the last virtual ASN event of this year. We're going to start again in January, and we're just taking a small holiday break. I would like to thank a lot Zsuzsa Csergő, who's been doing an excellent, wonderful job in putting together a great program over the last half a year, really since we've been developing the virtual ASN program in a number of great events, which many of you have participated in and watched, and we're going to continue then. Those of you who are watching, please rejoin or join the ASN as a member. It's your membership which makes events like this possible. We are a membership-based organization. We try to bring together academics who are devoted to the study of nationalism and a larger number of questions related to the regions like Bosnia and Herzegovina and Southeastern Europe, as well as many others. So please join, because it really helps us to do these panels, because I think this is a great way which we will continue to become engaged with our community and discuss these things irrespective of the convention. As Daniela mentioned, we all can't wait to go back to New York and have conversations in person, but these are great, not alternatives, but supplements, and help us to, in a certain way, survive intellectually until the time is that we can meet in person. So thank you all, and hope to see you again soon on Zoom, virtually, or in real life. All the best. Bye-bye.